I am Greg Sheen, John Moores University here, of course. I teach in a business school and I'm a member of the research unit for financial inclusion. Today I'm going to be talking about the interesting topic of how you manage your money and how that can impact on your health psychologically. If you manage your money any better, can it make you feel better as a result of that? And in particular, if you feel better and if you feel more capable of your own abilities, can that impact on how you manage your money and indeed how you feel psychologically in terms of your levels of stress or levels of anxiety? In particular, I'm going to be looking at the credit union as a service delivery tool and see whether the credit union has a role to play in this.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know where to stand, and in particular I don't know whether being given the first slot is better than being given the last slot. But I'm going to try and make the most of being given the first slot. And what I'm going to be talking about is something that I guess everybody's got a view on. If I ask you how you are in managing your money, some might cringe and say, I'm not too sure. Others might say, yeah, pretty good, because I check my bank balance on a weekly or monthly basis, or even on a daily basis. I know what's coming in, I know what's going out. I shop around for a good deal, and as a result, yeah, I feel pretty good about it. And conversely, if I ask you about how you're feeling, you've got a sense, I guess, of how stressed you might be feeling, how happy you are in relation to certain events that take place. Then if I say, okay, so how does your money affect your health? If I say, okay, by managing your money really well, or when you receive your pay packet at the end of it each month, how does that impact on your psychological health? I guess you've still got another view on that too. I had a view on that, but what I wanted to do with my PhD was to provide some evidence to document the true relationships between financial capability, how you are in managing your money, and psychological well-being. That's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. I'm going to then look at the credit union. I'm going to try and describe what that is for some that might not know what it is, and look at the role that the credit union has in, first and foremost, enhancing people's financial capability, and then by default, hopefully, improving their psychological well-being. My name is Greg Sheen. I work with Paul Jones. We work in a very small unit, as Paul described, and called the Financial Research Unit for Financial Exclusion. As part of my PhD, I tried to get some money to keep alive, and that wasn't to feel better, that was just to keep alive, really, to get this PhD done. And so I looked around for some funding, and I came across an organization in the United States called Filey. They carry out lots of research in relation to credit unions, very big organization in America. And they funded this study, and it looks at 1,600 adults, members of credit unions within the United States. It was an online survey that was sent to each of them from the credit unions that they were members of, and we got quite a healthy response. Some of the questions that we asked were validated scales on stress. I think 4 questions. How have you been feeling recently in relation to this or that? How are you feeling in terms of happiness? How are you feeling in terms of your self-efficacy? Self-efficacy being your belief in your own ability to do something. And some of the findings that have come out are findings that you probably would have known before we did this study, but as I said, it's to evidence the statistical links. And of course, people who feel better in managing their own money as a result feel better or have lower levels of stress, typically have higher levels of self-efficacy, they believe in themselves a lot better, and in general they've got generally better health. And as I said, this paper provides some kind of insight for credit unions in being able to enhance the psychological well-being of their members. So, I mean, why did I decide to do this? Because when I started this PhD about 3 years ago, there was limited scientific evidence on the links. You know, there were papers that had come out, and the researcher would literally ask the respondent, how do you feel in relation to your money? And they'll say, yeah, I'm stressed. You know, but they didn't use any validated scales at that point, this was a few years ago, to really see from an objective type of view whether there was this link. But again, there's a growing recognition that the credit union has a big role to play in the overall well-being of their members, not just the financial well-being, not just providing them with being, I guess, products and services that make them more financially included, but looking at the whole holistic picture. Here's some other studies, studies on worry and debt, and of course debt does become worrying, and it gets to a point where one becomes over indebted, and over indebtedness is something I look at in this study too, where people can no longer cope with their levels of debt, because debt is not always a bad thing. Some of you in this room already have mortgages, so it's a debt, but it's manageable, and it's essential for you to acquire the house. But then you might have other debts that you might be paying above the odds for. Aforementioned payday loans and Wonga, where they charge you thousands of percent in APR. It's debts like that that can send people into a situation where it's unmanageable, and that can impact on their psychological well-being. There's one study by Taylor, 2009, where he looked at financial capability in a similar way that I look at financial capability, and he looks at some of the things that I look at in terms of well-being and tries to strike a relationship between the two. Does it in a slightly different way, but it starts to provide this context on the evidence base. So some of the indicators that I used to measure psychological well-being were happiness, general self-efficacy, perceived stress, general stress. All of these have, and Adam will talk about this in some way, all of these have a value on the person. If somebody feels happier, then by default, are they contributing more to the economy because they feel happier? Or because they feel less stressed, are they more active in being able to manage their finances, and vice versa? If they feel more financially capable, does that reduce their levels of stress? So instead of somebody going to their GP and saying, I'm stressed out, and the GP prescribing, antidepressants, perhaps maybe a referral to a credit union or a citizens advice bureau might actually be what they need, because they need to address the financial aspects of their stress as opposed to anything else. It might just be that. This is why I did this study, to try and bring scientific evidence that maybe GPs could rely on. Some of the objectives then were to look at the interrelationships between personal finance, all the things that constitute personal finance. So it's financial capability, it's debt, it's over-indebtedness, and looking at financial exclusion, where people don't have access to the right products or services for their financial needs. The idea then is to look at all the different links, all the different scientific links, and that's why it was important to get quite a healthy sample. And for this, we got 1,600 people, which was reasonable enough, I guess, to achieve that. The end goal then was to say, okay, how can you look at a credit union and the way a credit union delivers its services and its products to its people or its members, and to what extent can credit unions help? It turned out that with this particular sample, we had roughly split. We had 57% female, 42% male, but majority of the sample was slightly older. That's what came out of this, that they were slightly older. Majority, 65 or 66%, were age 45 and over. And the reason why I draw on that point, because later in the findings you see that the financial behaviours of the older people are quite different to the younger people. We know that. But then as a result, the way the psychological health, the state of their psychological health is quite different too. So therefore, the likes of a credit union can't just use a broad-brushed approach with all of their members, when actually the financial capability of their members is quite different by age group too. What I try and do later on in this is try and paint a pen portrait of 4 different clusters of people and how their psychological health relates to their personal finances. Quite a lot of, well, half of the group were in full-time employment, and again, being in full-time employment, you see that actually leads to a bit more stress, and so you've got also less time to manage your money effectively too. I think some of the key findings was there was a gender split. In the UK, there's been studies in the past. One was done by the Financial Services Authority some time back in 2006 or so. That said, actually, and lots of different studies, some that even Paul's done, it says that generally females are better at managing their money than males, because they just are, They typically will look after the child. They're typically, more motherly with money too, not just with their children. But in the United States, the sample that we collected here, that finding was quite different. It said that actually the females were less able to manage their money and actually more stressed. Is that because there was a change in the economy? I don't know. Another thing was that if you could draw a line on the age groups, it seemed that those between the ages of 18 to 44 were less good, I guess. They were not as good at managing their money as those who were older. In particular, it was those who had retired who were older. Older and better at managing their own money. And it's funny because I'm doing another study on fuel poverty and how older people are coping with their fuel bills. And what I'm learning is that certain old people even in Liverpool here, are still practicing some of the financial habits that they were brought up with back in the 30s, 40s, where they would cook a big meal, store it away and use that meal throughout the week. But people my age, we would just maybe go to Asda and get ready meals or whatever. Cooking and putting down in the freezer is something that I can't find myself doing because I feel time's precious. I'd rather use that time to spend with friends and family, or I don't know. But anyway, there is a split in terms of age. Another thing that came out of this study was that, okay, the credit union can play a role in making people better at managing their money, making people feel better. But the credit union is not the whole solution. The credit union needs to be or work alongside another provider. So if you're a member of a credit union, only a credit union, you're less likely to be fully financially capable. But it's where you then become a member of maybe a bank and you're in touch with other financial institutions. And actually the more financial institutions you're in touch with, the better your financial capability and the better you feel. There's one question in particular, and it was subjective. It was, how do you feel, how organized do you feel when it comes to managing your money? And typically those people who said, yeah, I feel organized, I feel very organized with managing their money, were in fact showed better signs of psychological health. For example, the better people were at making ends meet and being able to manage their money, the less stressed they were perceived to have or be. They were less stressed. So how do you make credit unions play that role? I mean, the credit union it's like you wouldn't like me saying this, but it's like a community bank. It's typically found in communities of low income. And you go into a credit union and they offer, primarily they'll offer you a savings account and they may offer you a loan account. So people save, and the money that the credit union gets through savings is given out to other members to take as loans. And that's how they survive. There's a lot of government and other funding that comes in, but predominantly they want to try and maximize the savings so they can give out a loan. The interest they make on loans is kept and banked, and it keeps their business moving. It's a social enterprise in that sense. One of the objectives of the credit union then is to equip their members in being more financially aware, better at managing their money. And so here it's looking at the feeling of being organized with their money. And so is it that the credit union could, through making people more organized with their money, start to nudge them to feel better? You know, one thing that we looked at there is self-efficacy. And is it more that the credit union needs to use terms and statements that make people feel more belief in their own abilities, more confident in their ability to manage money? Being over indebted, again, there's statistical differences between those who feel over indebted versus those who don't feel over indebted. Those who feel over indebted record lower financial capability, they record higher levels of stress, lower levels of happiness, and vice versa. So again, if you could look at over indebtedness, and the credit union somewhat is a solution for over indebtedness, because the interest rate is a lot more affordable than the thousands of percent that are offered by the Wongas and stuff. So by making people more financially included to the credit union, giving them access to more affordable credit, it goes a long way to preventing them from becoming victim to all these high-cost credit lenders and hopefully then reduces the levels of over-indebtedness and moves them back into this pool of people who are not indebted, and as a result makes them feel better. Again, this is what I was talking about earlier on, that the credit union utility, I mean, using a credit union by itself is not enough. Using only a few of the credit union products and services by themselves is not enough. Credit unions need to be more open to referring people out to other agencies that can help. And the more they do that, the better and the more financially capable their members are likely to be. And again, the more psychologically better they feel. So this is a two-step cluster analysis that I did to try and paint a picture of these 4 different groups of people. First group, we called them the glory approaches. Now this was, don't forget, this was an American study, so the terms that have been used to describe these groups may seem a bit more American, but if you could stop and speak to any one of these groups of people and say, how would you sum up your financial capability? They would say, well, I feel very organized with my money, but I'm not perfect. So as I walk through these 3 or so more clusters, ask yourself where you fit. Do you feel very organized with your money? What does being very organized with your money look like? Well, typically it was those aged 55 to 60 in this particular group. They were either in full-time employment or wholly retired from work that said this. But they used their credit union as their main financial provider. They feel very organized with their money. They still did have other financial providers around that, but they used their credit union as their main provider. As a result, they were good at managing their money day to day. They checked their balance day to day, and they felt happier. They recorded being happier, less stressed, and in good health. So that's, I guess, where we all want to be. We want to be good, maybe not perfect, and if it makes us feel better, then great. The glory approaches. The calm and collected, then, they were typically retired, 65 and over. They use their credit union alongside their main financial provider. So their main financial provider then could have been a bank, and they use their credit union alongside that provider. I feel organized with my money, but I could be better. So there's a lot more that credit union, that member could have done to feel better about managing their money. Maybe they should check their bank account more often. Maybe they should shop around for better deals. I don't know what it might be, but there's more they can do to enhance their financial capability. Still though, they're recording low levels of stress and they're relatively happy. The doom dodgers. Now these, we'll walk into that situation where actually things are getting worse, and you'll get a sense of this. I feel somewhat organized with my money. I'll do it when I have to, but I won't always do it. We do have some debts, and some are becoming a bit of an issue, but we're okay. That's the kind of sense you'll get from this group of people. Generally, they're pretty good at managing their money, but the general health it's average. It is a bit concerning too. They're less able to make ends meet, and at times they need to depend on maybe their overdraft to get by at the end of the month. In terms of keeping track of their money too, they're less able at doing that, or maybe they just don't want to do that. It's not that they're not able, they know exactly what they need to do to keep track of their money, but maybe it's not a concern for them. They don't want to spend so much time or invest so much time. Typically they have average levels of stress, and their self-efficacy, their belief in their own abilities, are a lot lower too. Then you've got the group that's just out of control. They just don't do it. They don't check their bank account often. They typically use their overdraft at the end of the month to get by. They're used to it. I don't feel organized with my money. I'm actually slightly out of control, they would say. Again, when you look at their financial capability, it's the worst across the group. You know, when you look at the psychological health, they have the worst too. So there's a thing that the credit union could do in first identifying who these people are likely to be, and start moving them up to becoming maybe calm and collected, or to becoming a glory approacher. But it's important that the credit union understands that there are different groups within their segments. So you're looking at these 2 groups of people. You've got the glory approaches at one end, and you've got the out of control. And you can quite quickly see where the scores lie. You've got the making ends meet score, which is pretty high amongst the glory approaches, and it's quite different amongst the making and the out of control. You can see how the differences lie. It's quite a big difference, significant difference. Again, when you look at the psychological stress, psychological health scores, again, you've got massive differences between the two groups. So therefore, one size does not fit all when it comes to service delivery, and that's what this is highlighting. The out of control feel less mentally alert, less confident in their abilities to control important things in their lives. So it's not just how they manage money, it's looking wider than that. Say, how do they live, and what impact does how they live have on the way they manage their money? And they're less able to handle personal situations. So a personal situation could easily impact on their confidence, which impacts on their ability to manage their money, which in turn impacts on their psychological well-being. Throughout this, what I'm trying to draw is that credit unions have a role to play, and this helps credit unions to recognize what role they might play in enhancing the financial capability and the psychological well-being of their members. Again, another thing that credit unions need to bear in mind is that they might need to look at the confidence of their members in isolation to their money, in isolation to their health, but just look at the general confidence and the ability of their members to do something, and maybe first play on that, and then map that against how they could maybe manage their money more effectively. For example, through supporting and encouraging members to manage their money, credit unions could make them feel happier, less stressed, and experience better general health. This is a list of references that I've drawn on today. If you've got any questions, we'll take them at the end. Thank you so much.
Okay, well done, Greg. Thanks very much indeed. And I think it's important to recognize, to note that Greg's presentation there really is written up in a paper, which has been published by the Filene Research Institute in the United States. And so that will be available soon as well. And I think Greg is the first UK PhD student to be funded by the Filene Research Institute in the United States, which was quite good, and it is a massive kind of research institution. So well done, Greg. Now.
Hi, I'm Adam Richards from the Business School. I'm presenting today on social return on investment and how we can use stakeholder engagement to try and identify financial proxies to measure the impact of organisational activities. Afternoon, everybody. As Paul said, I'm Adam Richards from the Business School over in the new Redmonds building. I'm going to talk to you today about social return on investment. I don't know how many of you have heard of this tool before. I know some of you have, so hopefully it gives you a reasonable introduction to the tool, and I'm not teaching you things that you already necessarily know. Titled it Measuring the Immeasurable, with the question mark being quite significant. There is still debate about how far we can push these ideas around SROI. Should we be trying to measure some of these values? Issues that Greg raised around self-efficacy, happiness. They've often been a stumbling block that we've faced in our times. But we'll go through some of those in a moment. In terms of what is social return on investment, it is essentially an extension of the cost-benefit analysis. He said that it's a principle-led extension, and it's very much based on the core principles around stakeholder engagement, transparency, verifying the results, materiality as well, valuing those things that are most important, not necessarily trying to use a scattergun approach and measure everything within an organisational setting. But what we are essentially talking about, I guess, is trying to measure holistic organisational impacts. So it's extending the traditional business ideas that the only thing that counts is the financial bottom line. Trying to extend ideally into notions around triple bottom lines, looking at social and environmental impacts as well. What SROI tries to do is quantify and ultimately monetize these impacts. It's quite a straightforward process in theory. We ask the stakeholders, what has changed in your lives? We then ask them, well, how would you value those changes? And there's all these principles, and there's a detailed process behind conducting SROI. But essentially, to me, that's what it means, asking the stakeholders what has changed in their lives and how they would value those changes. So again, that idea of trying to quantify and then monetize these changes in stakeholders' lives is to, I guess, create a familiar language. It's this idea of creating a financial return on investment. But it actually isn't a financial return on investment. It isn't that traditional cost-benefit analysis. I see it as an extension of the profit and loss account. We take the financial performance of an organisation or a particular project and then ask, well, what else has happened? What are those additional impacts experienced by stakeholders? Both positive and negative, of course. We do try to capture any unexpected or negative changes. So I've done this for a few years now. I've worked with social enterprises in Merseyside, including the Furniture Resource Centre. I've got a really nice relationship going at the moment with the Commercial and International Directorate team, Lucy Day and others. And we've been looking at using this tool within Merseyside. So we've worked with Merseyside Expanding Horizons and Kensington Community Learning Centre, which I'm going to use in my case study shortly. We're also looking to, we've got contracts with Liverpool Community Voluntary Services, both Liverpool and Everton football clubs, MenCap and a number of other third sector organisations. So SROI, it does fit third sector organisations very well, but it's not exclusively for them. Private sector organisations are starting to take these ideas on board. What we're doing then, so we ask the stakeholders what's changed, how can we value those, and we're looking to get this ratio of return. So we basically plug into the sausage machine what are the benefits and what are the costs of those benefits. We get this nice ratio at the end, and there's an example there, 3 to 1. For every £1 invested, we get £3 of social value returned. Many people do focus exclusively on that number, and I think that's a potential weakness for the tool itself. It shouldn't just be seen as a number. Funders, unfortunately, will use this number, but there is more to it. It is this holistic picture of impact. You don't just get the impact map with all the inputs, outputs and outcomes and the number. We have a report that goes with it. And the narrative and the qualitative evidence is so important. SROI for me, when I've been asked to summarise it in a sentence, is a story of change with some numbers attached to it. The numbers on their own, it's meaningless. You need the story, you need the narrative, the overall picture that goes with it as well. So as it says, qualitative information is very significant. And we do try and quantify and monetize every change where possible. And some of the practitioners do believe that everything is quantifiable and ultimately monetized, or can be monetized. I'm starting to move into that camp where I do believe we can do, but I still have that nagging doubt and that nagging question of should we monetize everything? And it is, again, it's that idea of providing familiarization. So providing a funder with a numeric return on their investment is something they're familiar with. But perhaps if they're just looking at that exclusively, they could be missing out on quite a bit of the important information. Thought it was going to come up now, it is. So this idea to value or not value. So we can ask the stakeholders what's changed. And again, you know, the traditional cost-benefit analysis, what's the return, what's been the investment, there's the figure. We're extending that idea. And it sometimes takes a leap of faith. It's often quite difficult to communicate this idea that, in fact, yes, we're talking about money, but it's just, again, that familiar language. What we're talking about actually is social value. It's a measure of impact using a familiar language. When I talk to my students, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do this today, I didn't know how interactive it could be, but I often start with a position with my students when I'm trying to communicate these ideas of saying, well, how much money would you give me for my phone? What is my phone worth to you? And somebody may say, well, this phone to me is worth £10, £30, £100. And I'll often say, well, it's actually worthless to me. I don't place any value on it whatsoever. But starting from that position that value in itself is subjective, we would all pay different amounts of money for different things, allows us to move from that position of saying it's about money to a position of saying it's about value. It's about a value that stakeholders could attribute to a change they experience. And I guess some of the changes are fairly easy and straightforward to capture. And I would say there are 4 key changes that are possible. There's changes to income, Very straightforward. You've now got a job, your income's increased, by how much? Fantastic. We also have actual cost savings. So by using this service, have you saved a local provider some of their costs? So income changes, actual cost savings, fairly straightforward. The third change around potential cost savings is perhaps moving into a more difficult area. So you're no longer using your GP's service. We could say that that's saving the GP money or the NHS. Well, actually it's a potential cost saving because there's still demand in the system. We're not actually going to realise that saving because somebody else will take that place. The fourth and final and most difficult area of value creation are what we would call stakeholder-led valuations of change. So, what Greg was talking about earlier, you're happier. What's that worth to you? Your self-esteem has improved. How much is that worth to you? And this is where people, and I guess this is where the debate really sort of reaches its crux in how can we value some of those issues, the happiness, the self-esteem, the self-efficacy. And we create, I guess, this process again that goes back to that principle of asking the stakeholders. Those with the greatest experience, the greatest experiential knowledge, if you like, of a particular situation are probably the best people to give us information around this idea. So as it says, it's stakeholder identified changes with the caveat of then saying, well, those stakeholders that have identified those changes in their lives, aren't they also able to give us the valuations for those changes? The ones that don't concern income changes, potential and actual cost savings, but the softer stuff, if you like. And lots of performance evaluation or impact measurement stops at the output stage. So what's been put in, what's been created. So it cost X in terms of our investment, and we've created 10 jobs. There's the output. The tangible, hard change. SROI extends that thinking and says, well, what's the outcome of that change? Yes, you've got a job. So what? Asking that question, so what? What does that mean to you? Well, my income's changed. I'm happier. My self-esteem has increased. All of those knock-on consequences, if you like. And that's where SROI perhaps comes into its own and says, well, let's try and measure these outcomes and perhaps take it even a step further and say, well, let's measure the impacts of those changes. And by measuring impacts, we do take into account a bit of sophistication, I guess. So we're not just saying, well, what's changed and how can we value that? We ask some other questions and say, well, could it have happened anyway? A dead weight factor. We also ask about displacement. Well, have you taken that value away from something else? And I think a prime example in terms of displacement is when organisations often claim, well, this scheme has reduced local criminal activity. Fantastic. But have you just displaced it to another local area perhaps? Your neighbourhood watch scheme, now you have no crime on your street, but the street next door has doubled in criminal activity. Well, there's no value creation there, you've just displaced it elsewhere. We also ask issues around attribution. Who else has helped create these changes? Was it just the organisation? Were you involved in other agencies? Did family and friends have some role to play? Did you yourself bring something to the table that was valuable? And I guess by asking these questions, we get to a stage where we can measure the impact and we can get to that ratio of return whilst acknowledging the importance of that qualitative information. And the statement at the top there, measuring outcomes, is the only way to ensure changes are happening for stakeholders. Only by asking those people experiencing the changes are we able to ascertain as to whether the project or the scheme has been a success. I often say against my students that yes, we could just sit in our offices and create a social return on investment. I could assume, based on the investment, that 10 people will get jobs and they will earn X number of pounds. But without asking the stakeholders, without taking it to those people who matter most, how can we actually be sure that these changes have been realised? So again, it's that principle-led process of engaging with stakeholders. What has changed in your life as a result of your involvement with this activity? And then can we value those changes? So I've got a brief case study. As I say, I've done it with a number of organisations, and If you're interested in this, you really should speak to Lucy Day in the commercial and international team. We use the automatic, currently based on Edge Lane, potentially moving somewhere into the city centre soon. It's a fantastic little space that John Moores have. If you haven't seen it, I always describe it as the closest thing we have to a Google office space. It's a really fun, creative and innovative space where you can do really interactive things with different stakeholders. So with this, we got a number of stakeholders from Kensington Community Learning Centre down, and we engaged with their stakeholders. Kensington Community Learning Centre, as it says, is an adult community learning facility up on Kensington High Street. It's dealt with about 1,600 centre users over its 3 years of funding from the Big Lottery Fund. And essentially they were going for their second round of funding. They were going for that application. They approached John Moores because part of the requirement was to help them establish the value of their activities. Now they could say, inputs, £500,000 approximately. Outputs, 1,600 centre users have used our facilities. 600 or 700 people have volunteered for us over 3 years. So what? You've got the output. What's the outcomes? So what? What is the knock-on softer consequences of those activities? And this is where we came in. We needed to measure these additional benefits. And it's often the case with third sector organisations and social enterprises, I guess, in particular, that they'll often say, well, we do good things. When you say, well, prove it, can you demonstrate that? That's where the capacity is perhaps lacking. And that's where we can come in, not just ourselves, but many other practitioners, perhaps should add as well, and we can engage with our stakeholders to get a better idea, a better grip on some of these changes and what they're worth, remembering all the time that value is subjective. So, you get the engagement, you put it into what we call the impact map, which is essentially that process of inputs, outputs, outcomes, and the ultimate measure of impacts. So the impact map it ends up being sort of this size Excel spreadsheet with lots of numbers on it. So the story of change with numbers on it looks a little bit like this. I suppose the first thing to do is identify the key stakeholders. Now, an impact has the ripple effect of affecting many different stakeholders. And I guess the first thing you have to do with SROI is say, well, can we ring fence? Can we identify the most important, the most material stakeholders? So we identified a number. Centre users, volunteers, Big Lottery Fund themselves, a number of agencies, Citizens Advice Bureau. We're focusing on a couple of these though today. The stakeholders we engaged, we did a number of focus groups. From those focus groups, the centre users and volunteers identified their key changes, and there were numerous ones. From that process, we then expanded it and created a questionnaire that tried to get a larger sample. We got a sample of around 170, so nowhere near as statistically relevant as your own, but we do have to make occasionally these assumptions. So, a couple of examples. The majority of centre users, around 97%, reported that as a result of their activities with KCLC, their confidence had increased. Again, similar percentage also reported that they had improved friendships and or relationships. And there was a great example of one of the older people using the centre saying, well, my relationships have improved dramatically because now I can use a computer. Literally didn't have the ability to use it, but also was absolutely terrified of touching it in case you touch a button and it explodes. This person now has improved her relationships with her family so much so that she is communicating daily via Skype with her family in Australia. It's a real value to that person. If we'd have just said, well, what's the output? I can use a computer. Well, so what? I can use a computer to communicate with my family on a regular basis. All right, again, another issue around confidence. So having got that identified change, we then have to ask, well, can we value that change? Now, there are proxies available. So financial proxies is again that subjective, or wherever possible using objective data, to say, well, can we try and value this idea of confidence? There is a database being established by SROI UK Network, which is a Wikivoice or Wikivos which has a list of values, and you can select the appropriate one. Now that has value occasionally, so I found something, cost of the confidence building course, equivalent to £215. What we're saying there is it is not what everybody would pay to increase their confidence, but it is an approximation of the value of increased confidence. If those centre users didn't go to Kensington Community Learning Centre, what else could they do to increase their confidence? And one alternative is this idea of a confidence building course. So we do ask the stakeholders to value these things, but occasionally we can use some existing data. This second one perhaps shows how we engage with stakeholders a little bit more, and I think having that trust and faith in the stakeholders to be able to report their changes and also value those changes really changes the debate a little bit, and actually says, well, again, let's ask the people who know best. So this one, in terms of improved friendships or relationships, we played a valuing game with stakeholders. We said, well, what else could you do? Or how much is this worth to you? So what else could you do to improve your friendships? So they come up with ideas like friendships or relationships, remember? Sign up to an online dating service. Go on speed dating classes, lots of dating ideas, I'm sure you can see. And there's other ideas around friendships. Anybody heard of Rent a Friend? Check it out. There is a service available. If you move to a new city and don't know anybody, you can hire a friend at about £11 an hour. That friend, and it isn't friend, will take you around the city and introduce you to people. So there's a value to friendships. Not necessarily something we would do, but somebody somewhere would do so. So with all these ideas, with these values placed in a continuum, we then say to the stakeholders, you know best, here's the friendships you've got, the improved relationships as a result of these activities. Where does it exist in this continuum? And what they said is, well, it's about equivalent to spending £25 a month socialising with friends. If I didn't come here, what I could do is go for a meal with my friends once a month and spend £25. It's equivalent. It's not an actual value. It's a subjective stakeholder-led valuation. We did the same for volunteers and a number of other issues, and you can see this idea around improved job prospects. You can also use more than one financial proxy to illustrate that change as well. So here we've got in terms of improved job prospects, what they could have done is gone to a career development workshop, costing £80, but also their experiences. Because they volunteered for approximately 8 hours a week for 48 weeks, we could say, well, 48 weeks times 8 hours per week multiplied by minimum wage gives us a value of their experiences. If they didn't volunteer here, in theory, they could have gone and got employment. Obviously, we know that that's not always the case, but we can value these experiences. So their improved job prospects is the equivalent to both of these combined. I'm very conscious of time, so I'll fly through the last slide, I think. So all of these ideas come together, and just thought it's worthwhile thinking about, well, what are the implications for social return on investment? And based on my thesis, what I came to the idea was, by improving our knowledge, by improving the organisation's knowledge and perhaps funders' knowledge of what the organisation actually does and the impacts that they create, increasing that performative knowledge allows those people with decisions around funding and contracts to make decisions that are better informed and therefore, in theory again, emancipate the key beneficiaries. I see it as a way of bridging the gap between key beneficiaries of third sector organisations and those people making funding decisions. Now that would suggest that it's all about the external communication, and there is value in that, although again I am slightly hesitant that we just start to compare numbers. What I would also say is that it's a really useful tool internally. The Furniture Resource Centre group that I've worked with for a number of years, they do communicate this social return on investment. They're always very keen to say, you know, we create X in terms of our return. But now what they're using it for primarily is an internal decision-making tool. So if they've got 2 projects and they've only got the investment for one, they will do SROI in both. What's the forecasted potential changes? Value those two projects and make the decision based on which creates the most social value. So I would say, I guess in summary, it has both internal and external implications. It's not the panacea, it's not the tool that will solve all of our problems. I see it as part of an arsenal of impact and performance measurement. I think it fits very nicely into a social accounting system. It's also audited as well. And I would say that it does allow us to improve our accountability and transparency in terms of third sector organisations. Hopefully has those positive impacts in terms of continued legitimacy. Thank you very much. We'll save any questions for the end of this course.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. I was thinking there, Adam, when we were speaking, I've done a number of projects over recent years about financial services for people in the criminal justice system. Banks providing bank accounts for people in prison and coming out of prison. We're doing one now at the moment about credit unions offering savings account facilities in prisons. One that we did maybe a couple of years ago around a cooperative bank offering bank accounts for people leaving prison. The original motivator for that, of course, was the prison officers in the prison needed the people leaving to have a bank account so if they could get them a job, they had somewhere to be paid. That was the driver. Actually, when we did the research and we spoke to the beneficiaries, the stakeholders, the guys in the prison, and the ones that had left, the biggest impact wasn't the bank account for receiving a wage or benefit. It was the social and psychological difference it made in people's lives. We tracked 100 guys who'd left prison. The reoffending rates amongst that 100 were lower. Maybe all sorts of reasons there. But in terms of that social and psychological impact, what the difference would be in their families and what they would not be doing, it'd be really interesting to kind of try and measure that financially, because I guess, there will be a lots of cost benefits of guys that are no longer, feeding with the local shop or whatever. So it just struck me as how it links very much with what we do too.
I'm Tina Davies-Taylor and I work for Liverpool Community Health, and I'm going to talk today about the work of the social inclusion team, who work with people from all kinds of different socially excluded groups, from asylum seekers and refugees to gypsies and travellers, and how we look at their health needs and try to overcome the exclusion that they face.
Can I just say, Adam, Lucy Day is a really good friend of mine. I know it's really, and I think that the SROI, I think within the NHS would be fantastic. Anyway, but I'm Tina Davies-Taylor and I work for Liverpool Community Health, and this is our brand new logo, which some people were saying, does this look like a housing association, or what do we actually look like? But we're about giving people longer, healthier lives. And what we actually do is we provide all your walk-in centres, your dentists, your sexual health, your district nurses. We have a public health team. We also run the walk and cycle for health schemes. That's the, sort of some of the low level. But to us, every contact counts. So we have thousands of contacts. And the team I'm going to talk to you about today, I've been managing them for about 6 months. And actually doing this presentation was a learning curve for me, because it actually made me think about, well, what is it that they actually do in depth, and why do they do it? And sometimes you work with a team and people just do the job, and it's not until sometimes you sit down and you do your lessons learned and you sit and you say, well, why did that happen, and where does that come from, and why do we do these things? And a few weeks ago, we had some issues with some members of staff, and it was actually just going through things that opened my eyes and actually made me go and do some more in-depth work. And doing this presentation was actually something that helped me. So I suppose it's sort of, what is social inclusion? And some of the things have been touched on today, but for us as a social inclusion team, we're really concentrating on these things that actually go into people's health. So yes, you've got poor health, but sometimes health has got whole impact on a person, regardless of whether it's their financial situation, you know, whether they live in a high crime area, you know, they're unemployed, they've got family breakdown. So there's lots of different things that can go into somebody's social exclusion. And there's lots of people who are at risk. So again, we have a large community, which probably nobody knows. Do you know where Costco is down by down on the docks? Is Costco? Well, we've actually got a gypsy traveller site just at the side of Costco. Now, nobody knows that it was there, but now you do. But I've got a worker who works primarily, well, just with the Irish travellers and the gypsies. And I went on a conference last week with the member of staff, and it was unbelievable. I didn't realise that gypsies and travellers have a life expectancy, and this was a study that was done in Leeds, of around age 50, which is amazing because they don't access the same services. They have high literacy. You know, their literacy isn't very good. They're not very trusting. There's lots of different issues. And to tell you the truth, most of them hate the big fat gypsy wedding thing or whatever that went on. That actually did not portray a lot of the gypsies and travellers. But Liverpool as well, we're also a dispersal centre for asylum seekers and refugees. So we have a lot of asylum seekers and refugees in Liverpool. But mental health is one of the people who can be at risk. Older people, and people with disabilities. Okay, well, if you're in public health, you've probably seen this. You know, we've got the main determinants of health, and there's some things that we can do things about. In public health, there's some things that we can do, and the social inclusion team are based in the public health. So, you know, we can do some things, but there's some things that we can't do anything about. We can sort of try and work on the number one, so we can try and work on individual lifestyle factors. So we can talk to some of our communities, say, I don't know, the Somali community or the Caribbean community, about their intake of salt. But it's actually it's an individual lifestyle factor, but it's cultural as well, and it's something that has always been there. And we can sort of use the social and community networks to actually try and influence them lifestyle factors. And then outside of that, there's some living and working conditions that you know that we can have some impact on. But they're all things that actually affect you, whether you're unemployed, whether you've got clean water, and you know whether you've got heat. You're saying something about fuel poverty. You know, whether you put your heating on for an hour in the morning, or whether, like my mum, you sit there with the fire on low all day, and you keep the doors shut. And when she goes to bed, she moans because the room is cold. Anyway, and I'm like, anyway. But poor housing, you know, if you work in your work environment, and then you sort of your general stuff, and there's some things though, your age, your sex, and some of the hereditary stuff, we can't do anything about. Okay, we can't do anything about, you know, as we get a bit older, you know, everything tends to, I wouldn't say drop off, but you know, tends to get a bit worse and a bit more creaky, or you know, and for some hereditary factors in the in say the Afro-Caribbean community, they've got a higher prevalence of prostate cancer, and I'm trying to think of some others without scaring you. But there's lots of different hereditary stuff that is there as well. And that can do with your gender and sometimes your race. Okay, but this is some sort of Liverpool. So I was trying to think of what kind of social bio data. I was like, you know, I thought, you know, I'm not university education. I'm thinking you guys will understand this, you know. But in Liverpool, we've got a real diverse population. We've actually got one of the oldest Chinese populations in the UK, I think in Europe actually, and we've got sort of around, the last time a study was done, we've got around 86 different languages that are spoken across the city, which is massive. Some of the languages I've never even heard of. Okay, we've also got, in some of these communities, we've also got some high risk of diseases, and a lot of these communities, or some of them, may live in high areas of deprivation. We've got some of the areas in Liverpool where I've got some of the highest levels of deprivation. But there's also marginalisation goes on, but actually for the work that we do, that actually makes it easier because they tend to be in one area, so you're not having to, you know, put your resources here, there and everywhere. And as well, you know, for us it's about accessing services, but making sure that we actually acknowledge that there's diversity within the city. So it's not sort of only putting it in one area of the city, it's making sure that there's that accessibility. But we've also, you know, from a migration point of view, there's some higher incidences of certain infectious diseases from the original country that people have come from. So we've got this sort of, you know, this massive diverse population. We're at a dispersal centre for asylum seekers. And then we've got all these, and it's literally, it's trying to sort of take all that knowledge and support and make sure that there's equal access to health services. The team that I work with, and I thought after a while, I should have actually brought some of them today, but I know that they probably would have been be able to talk in more depth, but we've got 13 advocacy workers and link workers, and it's health link workers, but it's also the advocacy part is, so like the reforms that we're seeing now around the benefits system. And we had someone come and talk to us a few weeks ago. We have a communications meeting. So we had someone come and talk to us from the, where did they come from? I can't think now. Where did I tell you they came from? The Systems Device Bureau, Systems Device Bureau, because we're already starting to get questions, and these are people who are getting really, really, really anxious. There could be someone who's recently got their leave to remain, who's an asylum seeker, who's got severe mental health issues, and I know that people with mental health issues, the benefit system is currently not sort of, geared up to understand mental health issues, and you know, but the team, they've got a wide knowledge about ensuring that people access health services, but also making sure that the professionals understand about the exclusion things that actually happen to people. And they speak lots of different languages. I think it's about 13 or 14 different languages. One thing that we have in the offices is you cannot, two people, I think there's about 3 or 4 people that speak the same language or similar languages, and we're like, you can't talk in your own language because nobody else can understand. And it's sort of, it's because sometimes there may be an issue that someone's talking about that might have already affected someone else. And one of the big things that we always try and do is we always try and do lessons learned. So, you know, sometimes a member of staff may go out to someone who they need to register for a GP, because anyone who's an asylum seeker who comes into the UK, we have a duty of care to ensure that they're registered with a GP. A few weeks ago, one of our members of staff went out to a house and there was 2 young children on their own. You know, and it's sort of, it's what that member of staff does about that, and there's child protection issues and things like that, and as an NHS professional, they have to ensure that their children are protected. Luckily enough, the mother came back 5 minutes later and they were fine, but it's still an issue. But that person had to then explain to that mother that wasn't acceptable in the UK. But, you know, and then these see some of the things that we have. Some people think we're an interpretation or translation service, but we're not. We can, if need be, do some translations, but not always. But like I say, we advise on culturally sensitive issues. Things, but we don't just deal, I was saying, we deal with lots of different communities, but the Gypsy and Traveller community, but also the deaf community. There's a deaf centre up on Queen's Drive. We've got a dedicated health link worker who works in there, and they've got a really wide knowledge of local services, and it's really, I think for them, they understand the health and social care needs that actually affect the communities, so they know sort of who accesses the mental health services and who doesn't, and the stigma around that in particular. Okay, and these are some of the things that the small things that we do. So we will assist with registering for GPs, We work closely with statutory and voluntary agencies. And working with communities, we do put on health events as well sometimes to inform people. We have to be culturally sensitive there in some areas. But it's that sort of trying to reduce the health inequalities that a lot of these groups actually face day in, day out. Some of the, I picked up these figures just from April 2012. We've had 598 referrals in for asylum seekers and refugees to be registered with GPs. Sometimes people come in and then go out again. Doesn't mean that we've got 598 asylum seekers and refugees in Liverpool who've come here since then. It may be that they've come and then they've gone again, or they've not got asylum and they've left, or what have you. But we also facilitate 17 different health sessions across Liverpool every week. And that can do from, we have the health link workers will go to the antenatal clinics at Liverpool Women's Hospital on a Monday morning, and then they'll nip across over to Abacus. So it's like from one extreme to the other, if anyone knows what Abacus is, sexual health. So they're going from pregnant people to stop getting pregnant, or whatever else. And it's sort of, and quite often there's a cycle there as well, so they'll sometimes see the same people. But it's about cultural advice. So about when it's, say, Ramadan and people are fasting, so people who are diabetic, and it's making sure that they give people that information. The flu. In the Chinese community, and I heard this last week from people from the Chinese community, the flu jab, oh no, you shouldn't have it till you're 65 because you're not immune then, and that's their belief. And it's like, hang on a minute, that's not actually true. And it's up to, we've got 2 Chinese link workers, it's up to them to actually say to their communities, actually, this is the actual information, this is the correct information. Because quite often, I think the Somalian community, a lot of women believe because they've breastfed their children, they're not going to get breast cancer because they've breastfed. And it's sometimes it's getting over these barriers. The breast screening unit, so my other job is, I've got another role and I do cancer awareness, so I know a lot around the cancer field. The breast screening unit is based at the Liverpool Women's Hospital, and they get very few people who come for their breast screening from that local area, and we're trying to do some work. So when it's breast screening, when it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month last month, I went into the mosque with some of our health link workers to try and talk to the women to say, you must go for your breast screening, and it's something that it's never happened before, but it's trying to actually make sure that the people who are, say, at most, not necessarily at most risk, but don't have that knowledge, and it's ensuring that they've got that knowledge and then they can act on it or not act on it, however they see fit. Okay, well, I'm going to give these are just my last thing. 5 minutes, great, Sam. I thought I am so going to go over. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of some of the things that we've done as a team. And I've put dental because this is just, and people say, no, I've heard that story before, but this actually happened to a member of staff a few weeks ago. They got a message to contact a patient, and he was a patient who was deaf, and he attends a deaf centre, and he'd been to his dentist, and he thought the dentist had not offered him any interpreter or anything. Apparently the dentist, if they don't speak English, we offer them an interpreter. Well, this person doesn't speak English. This person actually speaks British Sign Language, which is a language, but they don't speak English. But because this person could slightly lip read, they thought, oh, well, he understands what he's having done to him. Well, he didn't. And he woke up with some he was knocked out for the treatment. And when he woke up, let's just say he was minus a few more teeth than he thought he would have, okay? Now we're advocating for that patient to make sure that doesn't happen to another patient, and it's ensuring that equal access to services. So it's going to maybe speaking to that dentist and saying, this shouldn't happen, this is what you should be offering. And then making sure that we spread that message out, because it's something that you think that shouldn't happen in this day and age, equality and diversity and everything else, but it still does. It still does. We've got a specialist worker who works on FGM, on female genital mutilation, and it's illegal in this country, and it's illegal for anyone from this country to go to another country who's resident in this country to go to another country and have it done as well. It can cause all kinds of different things for a woman in childbirth, for their sexual health, their health overall. And you know, we get a lot of people who maybe asylum seekers, and we're helping them to actually, so that their children don't end up going back to their country of origin and it happening to them. Like I was saying about the antenatal clinics, that there's a whole sort of raft of things that happens there. We've got the antenatal clinics, so some of the health link workers will meet people in the antenatal clinic, and then they'll meet them in the sexual health clinic, because that's quite, you know, that's the next step. But then we also run sessions in the children's centre, so it's about including people in their community as well. So it's like we're advocating for people, we're giving them access to health services, but also making sure they actually feel part of the community. So if you look at that whole, you know, the health and well-being, we're ensuring that they're happy and they're healthy from all kinds of different aspects. In our Chinese community, we have 2 health link workers who work in a GP practice, where primarily there is the Chinese community are generally tend to be registered, and it's in Chinatown, St James's. So we have 2 health link workers who alternate days. They'll get people who maybe have difficulty accessing the GP, but quite often their actions to someone who doesn't speak Chinese may feel like they're anxious, more anxious than they actually are, but it's the way that they speak, and it's sort of acting as a link really sometimes to try and buffer. But also as well, some of the work that we've done, if we look at some of the hospital admissions, in particular around certain ethnic groups, there's a high percentage of Chinese people who will actually turn up at A&E. Because their anxiety is slightly more. There hasn't actually been any studies done around it, but I think it's sort of, if we were to look at it, there's something that we need to put in between. So we put the Chinese link workers in to try and not stop it, but to actually give them the correct route to actually go. So they should go and see the GP first, or they could go to a walking centre or whatever, and not necessarily the A&E. And again, I was saying about the gypsies and travellers before, because I've already thrown that in. I think the thing that shocked me was when they did the study in Leeds, and you know, the life expectancy, when they compared it to the Leeds population, you know, was around age 50. I was like, what? You know? And it's amazing because there's all kinds of different travellers as such. You have your gypsies and travellers who maybe travel around, say, in a circus, or people who are, as we would class, like nomads, so people who've always travelled around, who, you know, you don't have to live in a caravan, you know, you could still live in a house and class yourself as a gypsy or a traveller. And it's one of the communities, I think, that have had one of the biggest portrayals recently on the TV, but I think that the actual community itself didn't actually like it. They actually picked certain people. Am I over? Finished? 2 minutes? Right, well, I'm going to finish it there and let you ask some questions of the 3 of us. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Tina.